So we are live for our July installment of our webinar series. Today we have an amazing conversation. We're talking about being where your feet are, learning to not get wrapped up in what could have been, something I think everyone can relate to in some way or another. So you're going to join us for a candid conversation about keeping your life moving forward. We have behavior and relationship expert Dr. D. Ivan Young, and he's joining our CEO and founding attorney Elizabeth A. Douglas Esquire for this month's webinar. Let's just go ahead and jump right in. So first, who is Elizabeth A. Douglas? Elizabeth is a fearless trial attorney and certified mediator who is unafraid to push the envelope in the courtroom. She's been selected for the Rising Stars list in 2014 through 2018, as well as a Super Lawyers list for every year from 2019 to now 2024. As a founder of the Douglas Family Law Group, PLLC, Elizabeth stands out as a visionary trial attorney specializing in serving high net worth individuals with a discreet and professional touch. Beyond her legal prowess, Elizabeth is a valued member of the executive committee of the New York Bar Association's Family Law Section, where she serves as co-chair of the Surrogacy, Family Court, Domestic Violence, and Diversity Committees. When she's not speaking at events or working with clients or on webinars, she indulges in rock climbing, snowboarding, cycling, hiking, and other adventure sports. Her commitment to making a positive impact on the lives of her clients and the community is a testament to her passion and dedication to the law. And our guest speaker today, Dr. D. Ivan Young. He is considered one of America's most highly esteemed preeminent life coaches. He's hailed as the reality check doctor, copyright, and he is known for empowering his clients to change their beliefs and behaviors utilizing a provocative teaching style on complex relational issues. Dr. D. Ivan Young, ICF, MCC, NBC-HWC, is a leading behavioral modification and relationship expert. In January of 2021, Dr. Young was selected for membership in the esteemed Forbes Coaches Council. Dr. Young is a certified professional diversity coach, credentialed through the Coach Diversities Institute, and he is a longstanding expert in diversity, equity, and inclusion training, specializing in conflict resolution and team building. Dr. D. Ivan Young states, quote, "Master level coaching is a creative process. Our primary goal is to help our clients develop new neuronal connections and networks while imagining new possibilities as they develop new behaviors and mindsets," end quote. All to say, we have some amazing people with us today, and we're very excited you're joining us. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to start with moving past the what could have been. We're going to talk about our friend Batna, who you might recognize from prior webinars, very important in any type of litigation. And we're going to talk about the key to growth, understanding, shifting your focus, and then embracing that growth. And then, of course, we always have our discussion and questions and answers. So now I'm going to turn it over to Miss Elizabeth A. Douglas Esquire. She's going to go ahead and kick us off.
Mark, thanks so much for that warm introduction. Dr. Young, welcome. What an honor to have you with us today. I think a lot of people are excited to have you here and to talk about this topic, about not getting wrapped up in what could have been. Dr. Young, I know that you've got extensive experience, and I cannot wait for you to tell us about how we can focus on the reality and move forward and really shift our focus and embrace growth. If you don't mind, I would like to start with some of the things that our clients talk to us about. Is that okay with you?
Of course, and it's great to be here.
Thanks. So I think one of the biggest things that happens to people when they're going through divorce and family law challenges is essentially that they're disillusioned. Why? Because unless you are mentally unwell in a significant fashion, no one says, let me get divorced, divide my assets, uproot my children, and change that idea of what happily ever after should look like. Most rational people just don't do that. But yet, whether you're the person who is the defendant in a divorce action and you just found out that you're getting divorced or that your partner's not happy, or you're the person who wanted the change and you are the plaintiff and you've brought it on, what is similar is this shift. Because your first vision of what you thought should have been or could have been now isn't. So we kind of get caught up in, we're here now, what happens next? And when people come to our office, we deal with complex assets, custody cases, primarily surrogacy cases. So there are people now who are at a point in their lives where they need to pivot. We like to say pivot with grace, but change that focus. And it is essential during a contested divorce or any type of family law challenge not to make your decisions based upon what could have been or kind of being stuck and make them based on emotion, but rather to make the decision pragmatically. And I think it's human nature to kind of reminisce and talk about, you know, if this bad thing didn't happen, I could have been here. If the car didn't crash, then I would have made it to the party on time. But the reality really is that the car did crash and you didn't make it to the party. So what do you do now with the information you have in front of you? I find that it's really easy to get distracted by thoughts of what could have been, thinking about what was ideal in the dream phase and the illusion, and then getting wrapped up in your emotions too much can cause tremendous opportunity costs. It can cause you to make rash decisions. It can extend the length and candidly the cost of your litigation. And of course, it often requires court intervention. Now, this perspective, though, shouldn't be confused with allowing yourself time to grieve and time to acknowledge, yep, what was, what might have been, but then what is. It is a separate process. I often tell clients and colleagues and friends that the divorce is like a death. It's a death of what could have been, but it's what you do now that really greatly affects your future and how things will go. And for the context of this webinar, my portion is more so focused on getting through the litigation. And with that, you have to allow yourself to grieve and then really start thinking clearly about how you envision your next steps, how you're going to pivot and make that mind shift with grace, and where you need to be. So getting clear on what you need and what you want. Needs and wants are often different things, right? So to survive, you need to have food and water and shelter of some kind. To survive in a luxurious manner, you need a lot more than that. So you've got to figure out what you need and what you want. Understanding this is really the first step and that chance to build a new future for you and your family. It's always a natural response to be hurt or upset or have some type of feeling that things didn't work out as you originally planned. But I think the real strong suit in this is acknowledging that things didn't go as planned. Maybe they're not what could have been, but now you've got the chance to design what should be, figuring out what you need and what you want, and not letting the emotions take over the entire process. There's a time and a place for that, but then once you can separate the emotion from the reality and then to what does the next step look like, then you're able to make smarter decisions in your legal strategy, in your personal life, in your coping skills for getting through divorce. Because let's be honest, even the most uncontested divorces are not easy. So it's important to be taking care of our mind, our body, our soul, our spirits, our finances, understanding where we're going, so that we don't get caught up in this emotional cycle of could have, would have, should have, could have, would have, should have, oh, only if, only if. No, we want to get clear on what do we need to get to the next step. Bringing us to our friend BATNA. As Mark said in the intro, BATNA is something that we see often in our slideshows and our webinars because it's real. It is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This doesn't mean that you can't go to trial. Although when you don't go to trial, you do have much more control over what happens to your family, to your finances, to your spouse, to your livelihood. But there are some cases that do go to trial. But rather, BATNA is really that negotiation with yourself first and then with the next person, because you need to have a map of where you want to go that stems from looking at the reality, letting go what should have been, being clear on what your needs are, being clear on what your wants are, and most importantly, being clear that you are never going to get 100% of what you want when dealing with someone else. Whether you're going to trial, whether you're getting a settlement, everybody's going to have to give up something. So in a settlement, you have more control over what you give up. In a trial, the court's going to make both parties give up something anyway. So now we want to talk about the standard to which any proposed agreement should be measured, which is your BATNA, right? It allows you to shift that emotional focus and think about what really is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It is the only standard that can protect you from accepting terms that are too unfavorable or from rejecting terms that would have been in your best interest. What do I mean by that? If we're not clear on our BATNA and we're not clear on where we are in the moment and where we want to go after the moment, it's easy to reject things off of emotion or off of the fly or out of anger or Nostalgia, that's never a good vantage point in any type of negotiation. So really taking a pragmatic approach to your settlement negotiations and or your trial strategy will help you to identify what your BATNA might be. Acting out of emotion, though, will likely and typically always leads to an unfavorable settlement that's not in your best interest to accept. The key to growth, understanding. Now, this one is tough, even for myself. All day, every day, all we deal with is divorce and family law, and we love it. But everyone has a personal life, right? But it's really understanding and being able to shift how you might feel about what could have been, how you might feel about your partner back then, back once, how you feel about them now. Maybe they really have done you wrong, or maybe you just really want to move forward and they don't no longer serve you, or you've grown apart, or whatever the reasons might be. You've got to be able to look at the scenario from both perspectives. And that does require taking your personal feelings out of things and being really clear about what's in front of you. And when you know what's in front of you, what it's going to take to get you where you want to go. So it's understanding your point of interest versus your position. It's imperative that you understand what interests are as opposed to what your positions are. They're two separate things. Interest, that's the motivating factor for your position. Why do you have that position and what interests you about allowing it to get you where you want to go? Versus position, which is your stance on what you want in a negotiation. I'm going to this and my position is, let's just say, for example, my position is that I am going to be the primary custodian because I have been the primary caretaker of my children and I know what's in their best interest. Maybe so. So that's my position that I've thought out. I've spoken to counsel and I have reasons why my position might be strong, why it might not be strong. But then you need to know your non-negotiables. Just because you want something doesn't mean you're going to get something. So knowing your non-negotiable points versus what you'd be willing to compromise on or what you could settle to is very important. You must understand that you will likely need to compromise on some of your points. So in my example, I'm going to be the primary custodian. I only know what's best for my children. I. The issue there is that I don't understand all of what's involved in the position, and I might not be looking to understand where my spouse is coming from or where the law is saying we should be coming from with respect to custody. By way of example, in New York State, custody is determined by the best interest of the child standard. It is not the I standard or the you standard. The court essentially is going to come in, look at the record of your family's history, your case, perhaps bring in a forensic, perhaps bring in an attorney for your children to figure out what's in the best interest of your children. So in that example, again, I might know my interest in my position, but I also have to know what's my bottom line. So maybe there, my interest is making sure I have meaningful involvement with my children, making sure that their educational needs are carried out, making sure that our family stays intact as much as possible, etc. But I'll need to understand that perhaps it won't just be sole custody to me. Perhaps it'll be joint custody to me. And then my soon-to-be ex-spouse in the scenario is going to help, he's going to have a position too. And we're going to figure out how we can effectuate that goal. If I don't take the time to understand what I need and what the whole picture looks like, I can't get there. You know who you're dealing with. So in divorce and family law, regardless of how you got to the pivot points of the relationship, right? Because that's what divorce and family law challenges are. They're a pivot point. It's not the end. You still have a chance to thrive. You still have a chance to move forward, right? But you know who's on the other side. And you actually know who is on the other side more than the judge does, more than your lawyer does, more than your spouse's lawyer does, because you're the person that has gone to sleep with and woken up with this person for whatever duration of time. If you have children, you've created a family together, you know intimate things about this person, you know how they function. Given you might not like them anymore, you might think that they're ineffective at communication and all a host of things, but use the information you have to try to understand their position. Understand does not mean agree. It just means understand where they're coming from so that you can understand some of your motives in either pushing back, acquiescing, understanding the power dynamic. you have more power and more strength and understanding when you go to negotiation than if you take a very tunnel view and you're stuck in just thinking you. So their interests. What's motivating them in the negotiation? So in the example I gave, I must have sole custody. Maybe my spouse understands why I feel that way. Maybe something happened to make me feel that he can't do the same job I could do. Maybe there's something that happened in childhood that I have a vision for our children, whatever it might be. Just set aside your emotion to think about what those things might be. And then their position. What is their stance? Why is their stance that way, regardless if you agree or not? Because when you know what's motivating the other side, it's going to help you to identify what they may or may not compromise on or give up. That way, you have a pretty good idea where your wiggle room might be, what you might be able to offer in exchange for something else. This is going to help you to identify the points to focus on during settlement negotiations and points that are unlikely to change, because we all have our hard line deal breakers, and those are the things that drive us to a trial. So, what happily ever after looked like then versus what's in front of you now. We could speak to hundreds of people who've gone through divorce, gone through a custody battle, gone through a family law challenge, and every one of them, I'm willing to bet, is going to tell you that there was a shift somewhere. And that shift typically stems from a hard dose of reality, but then an acceptance, and then a chance to figure out what they really want and how they're coping, right? So we don't want to get caught up in back then when everything was rosy and whatnot. Most people don't have their first dance hating each other. They have their first dance and the whole world is beautiful. Similarly, most people aren't in the middle of a trial or a contested divorce thinking the whole world is beautiful. It's a very difficult time. So we want to think about what was then is then, but what's in front of us now. When you can identify where you want to go, you're able to identify what your pivot point is going to be and what you need to get you into the future and to creating your next chapter. So Dr. Young, on to you with shifting your focus. I think you are on mute.
Okay, sorry, I had the mute button on. Mark, if we can we take the graphic down? One thing that I would suggest to anyone, when our desire is to maximize our, thank you, Mark, to maximize our potential, then I think it's critical that we move from a space where we're attached to the future or to the past, but we are very much so in the present. Oh, one other thing, Mark, can we go to full screen for presenter?
Yeah.
Thank you. Because what happens when we don't do that is we limit our availability to be actionable in a meaningful way with things that matter the most. A good example of this is when we find ourselves in a situation that can cause us to either be overly embedded in something because we're triggered or emotionally attached, or the opposite extreme is that we are so broken, so tormented and vexed that we're just, we're drowning. We're drowning in depression. We're drowning in regret, remorse. Either of those two conditions takes away one's ability to be present and to be mindfully present in such a way that they can give their full attention to what is before them. Mark, I think it's still holding. If we can switch to presenter.
Yeah, it has on LinkedIn. You're the primary.
Oh, okay, thank you. So what's going on with that situation is you're human. It is normal when you have, like Attorney Douglas just said a moment ago, No one went to the dance or that first date with the intention of, I'm going to be in a tumultuous situation that has me emotionally, psychologically, and mentally debilitated. And then I may or may not have children involved. Not to mention, you're disrupting now, if you've been in this situation or this situationship that used to be a relationship for a significant amount of time. This is also something that's constituent to your core identity. What happens when what is familiar, what has become your normal, now all of a sudden that train derails? The three things that you can do is, first, accept the fact no one plans trauma in their life. But if you're breathing and you're an adult, you are either heading into a storm, in the middle of a storm, or probably coming out of one. Just so happens this storm is near and dear to your heart, right? Accept that. Accept the fact that you are hurting. I'm writing a new book right now about empathy with self, compassion with self. This is important because how in the hell are you going to empathize with someone else or be compassionate towards someone else if you can't do that with yourself? In any breakup of a family or a breakup even in a business partnership or whatever, because that's a marriage too, there's collateral damage. If it's business, employees are affected. If it's a marriage, children are affected, even family members. If you are a high net worth couple, this gets even more traumatic because now you've got structures, LLCs, C Corps, probably some intellectual property stuff, real estate. All of this stuff gets just torn and clawed at when you are going through this dysfunction. Now, why am I highlighting that? Simple. If all of that was affected by your presence, what do you think is going to happen if you're not fully present up here or in here? If psychologically, emotionally, and cognitively you have checked out or you're overwhelmed, what are the odds of your outcome matching your intention? I can tell you right now, it's going to be pretty damn low. So being compassionate with yourself and being empathetic with yourself is a very, very necessary and good idea. The second thing is, don't do this alone. It's funny, I was talking to one of my accountants and they made a statement to me. They said, Doc, whatever you do, we advise you do not talk to the Internal Revenue Service alone. And no matter how much you have framed it in your head, what you're going to say, and for many of us, we're spiritual, prayerful people, especially in certain elements of our communities globally and especially in the United States. Well, God is going to guide me. First of all, God does not work with or for the IRS, right? And he definitely is not part of the judicial system, as we can see that reflected in the incompetence of our Supreme Court right now. So what I'm saying to you, and don't start writing me to my, now you're being blasphemous and you don't like the Lord. Put that over there. I want you to think bigger and understand that what is normal and normative in terms of circumstances, we have to get grounded, not over spiritualize stuff, not go off into some metaphorical, mystical place. We need to deal with what's in front of us right here. And that's why you reach out to somebody like Attorney Douglas or somebody like myself, because we are close enough to you where we sincerely care about what's going on with you. We are invested in what's going on with you. You're our client, you are our patient, whatever. And you would be very wise to bring competent counsel to the table so that way you can do what I said earlier, which is have the clarity to think clearly and be proactive instead of reactive, to be objective instead of subjective as it relates to you engaging a problem. The third factor is having an intent about your outcome. Many people fail in business and in relationships, not because they plan to fail. The truth is they fail to plan. There has to be a strategy associated with your actions and your thought process. If you are going to have an intentional outcome, you might want to sit down and think about what that should look like. I urge my clients, before you do anything, let's take some inventory. Let's take inventory of, okay, where did I get my beliefs and my thought process from? In other words, how much of your core values is affected by what's indigenous to you? By indigenous, I mean your generation, your nationality, your gender, what is common in the framework of your cultural environment. If you know where you are, then the odds of you getting where you want to go will be much greater, right? Many of us have GPS ability on our phones now, and some of you have it in your vehicle, most of you. But let's go back a few years, shall we? When they first came up with that technology, the first thing that you put in was not where you wanted to go. The first thing you would put in was where you're starting from. It is very important that you understand, where am I as it relates to this situation right now? I'm not trying to practice law without a license, but one effect of what I do is I end up working with a lot of very competent lawyers, like Attorney Douglas being one of my favorite. And we have to ask this question, what's going on with you? Tell me, how are you doing? What are you doing? Because if you don't know that, we can't help you gain the clarity you need to have the outcome that you desire. So it's a good idea for you to actually take a pen and paper and just write down, okay, this is how I'm feeling. This is truly how I'm feeling, almost like you would write in a journal. Then after you write that down, take a moment to look at it and reflect. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? See, some of the things that could be affecting your emotional state could be circumstantial. It could be your health. It could be the fact that you have a loved one that's in a chronic state of dealing with a terminal illness, or God forbid, is your child. It could be some economic pressures where you may be put in a threatened position, because if this relationship is disrupted, or there's some stuff going on where you work, or, and those of you who are JD, MD, PhD, nurse practitioner types, CPAs, what have you, your license, your credentialing could be at risk if you're not thinking straight. So we have to ask ourselves, what is causing you to have the feelings that you have right now? And how is that affecting your clarity? And again, this is where accountability and having counsel comes into play. We're human too. We got stuff going on too, but it's our job. And we're probably very good at it, those of us who are appropriately credentialed. We're good at being able to separate feelings from reality. We're good at being able to understand that there is a construct and constraints around how a process is going to work. Give you an example. I have had many of my high net worth clients in my office be just vexed about having, number one, coming to a place where the relationship has come to that season. And I want you to understand something. If you are going through relationship hell right now, all relationships come to an end, either in life or death. So if things were going great, death can shut it down. or life can cause one or both of you to come to a point where that season that brought you together now has come to an end. You have evolved in certain ways, or one of you is evolving when the other one's not moving forward. So you realize, okay, we're misaligned right now. Well, when that happens, it's a good idea to stop and have someone there that can help you make sense of that. And the more that you can take things from an emotional state and put them into a state where you're looking at things in a cause and effect way, in a logical way. I'm not going to say it's going to magically make what you're dealing with subside and dissolve. What I am going to say, and here's a good example, like I was saying with clients in my office, when it's time to make that difficult decision that, I'm looking more forward to leaving home than I am coming home, or when I see your name, I get a headache and all of a sudden I lose my appetite. Well, your well-being matters. And if you're not good for you, how in the hell are you good for your kids? If what's going on in your household, or even if this is in a business relationship, is when the two of you are present, whether you want to call this the kids at the office or the kids that God bless you to have, or the blended family, there's already been enough trauma there. People don't need your extra layer of BS to affect people that are in a very vulnerable state, because here's the example. Your employees have to go home to their spouses and their kids. And if your crap migrates into their household, the whole vision you had for having this brand, this business, and helping people be able to pay house notes and provide for their kids because of the gift that you have or the brand that you have, you just undermine that because you've contaminated the very thing you had a vision for. If this is just in your life, your marriage, your family, your household, and you've got a kid between 3 and 7, and that's when children start formulating and you throw in the monkey wrench of instability or chaos or what have you, now all of a sudden you have compromised these kids you say you love. And what's going on in these environments, and I'm going to really speak to this from a parenting standpoint, kids, they may remember some of what you say, but they will never forget what they see you do or how it made them feel. So if you go and make a toxic deposit of dysfunctional behavior, and for you that say, well, I have a baby, or I don't have a kid anymore, I have a young adult, somebody over 13, 14, 16, even 20 years old. Well, let me tell you what's really going on. Our first language is not words, it's pitch, tone, and inflection. We are affected by that before we even come out mom's womb. And think about, how do people talk to babies? Soft voice, non-threatening, and very much so rooted in compassion and affinity. But what do you do when you're pissed? No. You notice how harsh that was? Stop, right? It's abrupt. The second language we learn is facial expressions. That wrinkled brow, flared nostrils, that grimace. And see, it's not just that you're walking around looking like a scorched cat. It's that little micro expression, especially when kids are between 18 months to 3 years old. They see everything, and so do your teenagers. They see that little look when you look at each other and you go, it only lasts for a second, but it's nuancical. And that becomes embedded as somebody's template for dealing with relationships. Well, what you're teaching your child is mediocrity, which is the worst of the best and the best of the worst. So where I'm going with this is real simple. This third thing about looking at, how I feel, how it's affecting me, what is it causing in terms of how I show up? What is it causing in terms of how it impacts my health? or how it impacts my psyche. All of this stuff matters. And if we're going to do justice for ourselves, we can't do justice while allowing injustice to be part of the construct. Those two things don't go together. Now, the last thing I want to touch on is this. Who you have in your ear matters. People like myself and Attorney Douglas, we don't take everybody. One of the things that attracted me to their law firm and their brand was it doesn't matter how many stacks, that's street lingo for how much money you bring in there. Because you can come to me. I've had NFL players show up in my office with 15, 20 grand in cash. And my first question is, why are you here? How can I help you? And they may have been referred by an agent, another player, but all money ain't good money. Where I'm going with this is you cannot engage even the best of counsel, the best of coaches and clinicians, unless you do that for the right reasons. Those reasons should be that you want to be the best version of yourself for you, not just for the people like your kids or your employees. You need to do that for you. I know one of the number one things that I look for if I take someone on as a client is, are you here because you want to be the best version of you? Because if you're here hoping that my name and my level of influence is going to validate what you say, and that's even if you're right, I'm not going to work with you because your heart isn't in the right place and your head surely isn't going to follow. There's something that I read in the spiritual text that says, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? Another thing that you read is it says, as a man thinks, so is he. What I'm saying to you is, if you want a great outcome, first you need to start with being in the right position for the right reasons. So in summary, positioning matters. Who you're aligned with matters. Having clarity about the vision that you want matters. And the goal of being right, one thing, I'll say this and kick this back to you, counselor, is a statement was made by Attorney Douglas earlier where she said that when the court is done, nobody's going to get everything they want. And that's true. Life is not fair. If it was, we'd be living fairness, not life. Life is just. And it's just what you make it. A good judge and even good counsel is going to seek the same thing I seek as a clinician. I don't care. You may or may not like me in the short term, but in the long term, if I know that you're going to look back and say, you know what, Dr. Young may have pissed me the hell off, but at least I know he had my interest at heart. He was thinking about my kids. And the intermediate term, when the dust starts to settle, you can look back and say, you know what, I may have been a little rambunctious and a little hard-headed. Thank God this guy was, keeping the rails on for me because I was not on track. That's what you want from counsel. That's what you want from a clinician. And what I would dare to leave you with today is be present. Don't live in the past because you can't do a damn thing about it. Don't live in the future because it hadn't happened yet. All you have is right now. And if you focus on doing the things you need to do in the present, tomorrow will take care of itself. Last little cliche. Yesterday is history, tomorrow's a mystery. Right now, this very moment is a precious gift. That's why it's referred to as the present. If you want to make the most of this gift of the present, be mindful, appreciate it, and do the right thing with it. With that, counsel, I defer back to you.
Dr. Young, amazing. I know you are, I knew you would be, but that was amazing. I think what you've said resonates with so many of us on many different levels. myself personally, definitely resonates with me. What you just ended with, though, leads me to a question. What do you think about this whole concept of opportunity cost?
I'm going to take my interpretation of that statement because there's so many ways to look at that.
In the
But
confines of a divorce or family law challenge and moving forward.
yeah. Like anything else, there will be no gift or reward without sacrifice. What you have to ask yourself is, what is my vision? And look at this cost benefit analysis. What does it cost me if I continue to do what I've been doing? What does it cost me? What does it benefit me if I can make a sacrifice now that brings me much closer to the vision that I have for my life? That cost benefit analysis should always end up with the greater portion outweighing the cost of what you have to sacrifice now. Attachment that we have emotionally is often colored, and the paintbrush is composed of what you've seen. As long as you hold on to the lesser known, you will never have the greater unknown.
I completely agree. So, Mark, I know that our audience must be chomping at the bit with some questions. Do you have some for us?
I do, yes. I have a couple. They seem to come in privately. I'm gonna kind of make up a fake name for them so that way they don't feel, like we're putting them on blast. So one is it came in when we were talking about pivoting and kind of finding your new path. So it was, how do you know if it's too late? It sounds like this person might be going through a divorce or at the beginning stages of a divorce, and they want to understand when are you certain that it's time to pull the plug?
If I may, I'll start with that. Anytime that you are experiencing more turmoil than triumph with something, that's when you might want to start critically analyzing it. The next thing is, ask yourself, what is my contribution to this? It is so easy to look at what someone else is or isn't doing. But I have found, even in abusive relationships, and God forbid, if you are in a relationship where somebody's putting their hands on you or you putting your hands on something, that's a sign that somebody lacks emotional regulation skills and they need to really hurry up and get their behind to see somebody like me. But that doesn't mean you should stay there and be a punching bag, either physically, verbally, or emotionally. There's a time before you pull the plug where you press pause. And this is where I'm going to, again, I don't want to practice law without a license, but that's when you take that first step and you seek counsel. You seek it on both sides. You need to go and sit down with somebody like Attorney Douglas and say, you know what, let me go ahead and pay you so I can know what my options look like and what the consequences of my behavior may end up costing me. Because if you don't approach something the right way, I've been, and I have clients that have net worths that would be considered, somewhat high. And when I'm dealing with an ultra high net worth client, which in few cases that I have been where the assets have been very significant, and by that I mean 25 million up, I've said, look, why don't we go through mediation, get a primary attorney and a secondary attorney to look at the other person's interests, because in most states you can't have one attorney represent both parties and something like that. But the truth is, let's stop now before we end up spending $500,000. Let's spend 100. Let's spend 50, and try to be rational with some stuff. Well, see, when you get to a point where you have to start thinking that's the road you may go down, that means you probably are already on that road The second step is this. You want to make sure that you have done everything in your power so that you can look back, because you will have regret. I don't want you to have remorse, because remorse means that there is some stone you left unturned. Regret means you turned over all the stones and it just hurts, right? So that's when you come to me and we sit down and I meet with you and your significant other, and I have you take some clinical assessments. And that's when we come to this place, which a lot of this is something I really want you guys to hear. It's not always supposed to work out. Marriage counseling is however rated because most marriage counselors aren't competent enough to understand the psychological development, the epistemological development, how to manage trauma, just all this other stuff that goes into what makes you human. But the truth is this: when you see that you're at this place where you're looking more forward to this person leaving home than coming home, where you're looking more forward to leaving home than coming home, when you are having more memories housed in regret than hope, that's when you know that the alarm's on and it's time to go and pick up that phone and get competent counsel so that you can have the clarity to make the next step without it being rooted in emotion. And you can at that point be much more proactive as opposed to being reactive. Because if you do things and with foresight, you won't have the remorse that comes with doing things in hindsight.
I couldn't agree more with that, Dr. Young. And one of the things that we encourage all of our clients to do is to work with and see experienced professionals in your field like you. Like you mentioned, not everyone is created equally. And people who have your type of experience, Dr. Young, who can understand and see the whole picture, how the neurological portion of this really does affect people's behavioral aspects, their decision making. A client who's done that work first, when they come to us, I tell every single person who works at the store, we are not divorce pushers. I don't run my practice to get you divorced. When you come to us and you want to be divorced, that's what we're dealing with. And we're talking about, what does your village look like to help you through this? Where do you want to go? What's the reality? What the laws, and how do we do that? So I think it's coming to do the work first. Lots of people come to our practice to get information, and there's nothing wrong with information gathering because it helps you to make an informed decision. So you want to get legal information, you also want to have emotional information. So that caller or that person who asked the question about when's it too late, from a legal context, it's not too late if the judge has not made a decision for you, right? So until there's a final order of divorce, it's not too late. But it's the first step that I think is hardest for most people to make. It's that first phone call, whether you're information gathering or you're now ready to move forward with making this change. And once you can get yourself unstuck from that, I think that's really when positive movement starts to happen.
I would
Awesome.
agree with that.
Awesome. Thank you both. So another question we have here is how can we be more aware of those nonverbal affects you were talking about, Dr. Young, of the tone, the body language? How can we be more aware of how we're coming off to the other party?
What you're referring to is emotional intelligence, right? That's so subjective in that there are several things that affect how we perceive what that is. Good example of this, if you come from an environment where raising voices and shouting and being out of control, not having good emotional regulation, if that is your normal and that's cultural for you, you would think that, well, I told him to shut up and I screamed and yelled. Well, if everyone around you does that, you're going to think that's normal. You have to come from a place where, one, you can assess, is my behavior off the chain? Is what I'm doing conducive to the well-being of myself, my children, and the other invested parties, the other stakeholders? You typically can't determine that on your own. The best of clinicians use some type of clinical measurement to assess emotional intelligence emotional regulation, and to look at personality type and conflict mode management, because
Maybe it's a little technical difficulty.
work, we can look at CAT scans, and we can look at MRIs or what have you, functional MRIs, and we can see physiological markers that indicate that there's something irregular or possibly something inhibitory or something that is just necrotic that's going on. Well, in my business in behavioral medicine, we have the same availability through assessment, through observation, through self-report measures, and by interviewing all parties involved, we can see things in a comprehensive manner rather than a subjective manner. And that will quickly tell us, okay, here's what's wrong. Here is what's contributing to it. And then that's when we start looking at mitigating that. I do that process by working one-on-one with each individual involved while doing a deep dive into family history, into genetics, and to brain function, emotional regulation, et cetera, et cetera. So by doing that individually, then I bring these people together collectively. That's when we can identify, okay, do you have an equal commitment to resolving this? And if so, here's the work you need to do. Here's the work you need to do, because you cannot fix something collectively unless you first fix the individual people involved in it, right? And that would be the first step. The second step is when you start seeing that there is more of an intent to win and be right than to collaborate, that is a big sign that you're probably in a necrotic situation. And the last thing is that when you keep violating someone's boundaries and attempting to control them or remove them from things that are good for them, like friends, family, and it comes to a point where it's debilitating, where this person is either gaining a lot of weight, not eating right, experiencing things like chronic depression and anxiety. That's the red flag when it's time to pick up a phone and get counsel on the line and get me on the line, because you need people that will have the greater good in mind and not you just getting what you want, because what you want may be based on a codependency, a dysfunctional codependency, or some parental and cultural modeling that is probably not indicative of a good outcome for your children or for yourself in the long run.
Great. Yeah, and I think that ties into very nicely what we were talking about too. If even in those situations where you need the counselor, you need the therapist, I think understanding, having that objective third-party voice that's invested in your journey, I think is what's so important to making sure that you do pivot with grace, that you do identify the best path forward. So that's great. So our last question, because I know we're pushing on the hour here. So our last questions came from an Eliana, and it says it's for both of you. So it says, have you seen Does Time Really Heal All?
I think
Go ahead, counselor. I need to stop laughing first.
I think in some sense, yes, it does, because either you're going to have adjusted and adapted, gotten purposeful amnesia, figured out some way to move past it, gotten older, gotten more wisdom, or something's expired. So at some point, if we're dealing with something, it heals most wounds. But I do believe that there are some wounds that if you don't do the work to acknowledge what caused the hurt, what might have caused you to be stumped, that they will live in your head and affect lots of the other coping mechanisms that you display, how you handle things, how you strategize. Just dialing it back, if it can be, to the context of a divorce. Yeah, time heals everything, because your case is going to end. It's going to end with the judge deciding what's going to happen, you signing a stipulated settlement, but at some point, all the lawyers, the forensics, the judge, the court, the doctors, the evaluators, the pension people, the real estate appraisers, all the people you're paying money to and writing checks, they go home, they go away, and you're left to deal with yourself. If you have children, you're still a parent. And if those children have another parent, that person, as long as they're breathing, is still your child's other parent. So those are the players that you're left with. And whether or not those wounds are fully healed, that's up to you and the work that you do. But the big wound of the actual divorce, yeah, that'll end. That's my 2 cents on that answer. Thank you, Ileana.
Yeah, I want to just add some icing to that. Time does not fix anything. But time answers all things. Here's what I mean by that.
Like that. Hadn't heard that.
You must come to a point where you stop thinking about it, talking about it, and worrying about it, and do something about it. The minute that what Attorney Douglas said earlier was, when you pick up that phone. Because if you keep doing what you've been doing, just expecting it to go away, it is not going to go away. And if you use the ostrich strategy where you're going to stick your head in a hole, all that's going to happen is life is going to sodomize you and you're not going to know who did it. So the thing that I would advise anyone to do, that if it's troubling you enough that you're actually thinking about you need to do something about it, that's probably your spirit, if you want to use that term, your subconscious, if you want to look at it that way, or if we just want to get real simple, your common sense telling you that this is not conducive to my well-being. I am troubled. I'm vexed. I'm not, and the physiological signs, I'm not getting any sleep. I can't eat. I have a headache. I have a migraine. My shoulders are tight. When those somatic symptoms are showing up in your body, that's when it's time for you to first call me or someone like me. And if that clinician has your well-being at heart, they're not going to go down la-la land with you. They're going to do what's going to bring you back to clarity and wholeness. And that's when I'm going to say, like, I'll say this in 30 seconds. When people come to me, I don't try to keep everybody together. They're like, what? Well, no, I don't. I want you to get clarity about who you are. I want you to take responsibility for your actions, become self-actualized. And if that happens, the odds of your relationship working out are much greater. But I just want to warn you that sometimes you can have that happen and realize I got in this relationship for validation, not for the right reasons. And maybe I need to take 2 steps back. I'm not saying get a divorce, or you may get a divorce, but I've seen a lot of people get a divorce and get remarried appropriately once they resolve their issues and get some clarity and maturity and become whole in self. So some little answer, time's not going to fix it, but it will reveal a great deal.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. And that's like Elizabeth said, I've never heard someone say that. And that's a profound thing to say. It's not going to fix it, it's going to answer it. That's great. Awesome. So before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you again to Dr. Young for joining us. Thank you, Elizabeth, as always, for hosting. And we're going to have resources in the LinkedIn as well. We'll have it on YouTube, on our website, all the usual places are Facebook. We'll have the recording. We'll have links to Dr. Young's services as well, so you can kind of explore all everything we talked about, as well as both the speakers. And then before you go, we always have our little initial consultation discount for anyone who's viewing. So if you book by July 31st, with the code REFLECT 2024, we have a $200 off your initial consultation. And then if you book by August 31st with the firm, you receive $100 off your initial consultation. Again, that's for our firm, and that's for with the code REFLECT 2024. So if you call and you just let us know that you watched the webinar, that you have that code for us, we'll know exactly what you're talking about, and you get the discount for that initial consultation. So so thank you all, everybody, again for joining us, and we hope to see you next month.
Thank you
Have
so
a great weekend.